Hello, you guys. Welcome to this week's episode of the Expand and Evolve podcast. I'm here with a guest this week, which I'm so excited about. Her name is Joti Deol. She is a certified holistic nutrition and health coach. Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit. Maybe just share a teeny bit, like you can share what you do to like at a high level, and then obviously we'll jump into it. And just like maybe touch on why you think this topic is so important in specifics to, because I don't know for sure if we're going to go more into adults or if you want to keep it more specifically to kids, but just to share like why this is important and why this work that you do is so valuable for people to start understanding. If you had to just say something on that quickly.
Mhm. Yeah, there's so much to say on that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So my name's Joti Deol. I'm a certified holistic nutrition and health coach, like you just mentioned. I'm a mom of two little ones. My daughter just turned 6 and my son is 3. And I'm home with them full time pretty much now while I'm also doing this and helping people. But what kind of got me into it? Well, I have my journey throughout, being a millennial and being raised on all the crappy 90s food. So I had my gut issues growing up, and I really didn't know the gravity of it until like my 30s, which is so crazy to me to believe. And that's kind of why I'm in this field now, because I don't want our kids to grow up having to figure it out when they're 30, and like why can't they just be healthy from the get-go? So yeah, I had my health issues. I saw doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist. Nobody really had any solution for me other than medication. And at one point I was just like, I can't take anything anymore. I was on medication for high blood pressure in my 20s when it was really anxiety. I was on anti-anxiety medication. I was on something for IBS, like you name it. I was seeing a specialist for it and like on medication for it. And then I got pregnant for the first time, and I ended up having gestational hypertension. And I was like, what? How in the heck does someone super healthy, like on paper, looking at me healthy, have so many issues? Um, and I started diving into nutrition and diet, and I actually went totally the opposite way from what I am now. And we went plant-based, and my daughter was raised almost vegan her entire life. Like I used to say, we don't eat animals, they're our friends, and we don't touch that stuff. She was on soy milk. She was having the processed cheese, like all the bad vegan food. We were doing it. And then my son was born in 2020. And right before he was born, that's when things blew up. Like the whole world shut down when I was about 7.5, 8 months pregnant. And it really kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of the corruption that's out there. And I went back to school during the initial lockdown. It was all online. And I went back for nutrition. And I was just so eye-opening. And it changed a lot of how I went into the birthing part of that pregnancy. Yeah, and then so he was born, and we were happy, healthy, postpartum, and just going through that whole
Wait, I have a
year of
question. So when
yeah,
he was born, were you still fully on the vegan train of like all the
yes.
processed stuff, or so you hadn't transitioned out of that yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
We're still in it. It's still like healthier on the healthier side, but
Yeah.
even the school that I was learning from, it's very pro vegan, like pro plant-based, lots of vegetables, which is not bad, but in some cases, in our case, it ended up kind of doing a little bit of damage for our already compromised guts. Yeah, so he was even raised vegan his entire life and up until he was about 18 months. And he
Were you
had
nursing or were
we
you?
yes, we
Yeah.
did. We did that, and
Okay.
it was hard.
Mhm.
Nobody talks about how hard that is, but we
Yeah.
struggled till he was about 10 months when I ended up stopping. Like, he bit me, and I was like, "I can't do this anymore."
Yeah. I'll
Yeah, so
say too on the biting, I just want to say this because I feel like that's something and a lot of people get want to stop at that point. But something that I always did, this might sound a little extreme, but you kind of suffocate them. So when they bite, you shove their face in so they can't breathe for a second, and then it kind of startles them out of it. And
Yeah.
I might have had to do that 3 times, and I never got bit again. So it's just like interrupting their pattern that they go, oh, whoa, okay, I don't want to bite because this happens to me. You don't like
Mhm.
hold it for minutes, but just a couple seconds to make them kind of go, wait, what? And they just it disrupts them a little bit. So if your baby is biting, um, shove their face into your boob for a second so they can't breathe, and it'll help. The sun's coming out on my face. Um, okay, you can finish off with that, and then I have some questions for you.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I would
Yeah.
probably have done that.
Mm.
But my supply always around like 6, 7 months, it just starts for both pregnancies. It just started to like dwindle. And I was like forcing it the second time around because I know how important it was and I didn't want to put him on formula. So I was like struggling. It was a struggle bus. And that was just kind of the end of it. But he was our like at that point I knew that he didn't probably need to be on any sort of formula, but not knowing any better, I put him on soy formula. And then he ended up having a lot of health issues. Like he
That's what I was gonna
um
ask you, because I was gonna be like, if you were still on the vegan train and you had to
yeah,
stop nursing, like, what did you do? Because
it yeah.
yeah,
It was a soy formula, and there's no good options. And at that point, even for the organic options, there wasn't a lot. My naturopath had suggested, importing some from Germany, and it wasn't as easily accessible as it is now, I think. And I was just like, this is too much. Like, I just actually ended up taking him completely off before the 12-month, the deadline, I guess they call it, but I mean, this isn't medical advice. I'm not telling everybody to do that, but for us, we just ended up taking him off. Yeah, so he ended up having the really bad, like gut issues, and he was anaphylactic to nuts. Like I gave him peanut butter for the first time, not thinking anything of it because it doesn't run in our family, and his whole face blew up. So we had an EpiPen, and then he ended up getting like really bad eczema all over his cheeks and his face. And we tried to manage it as best as I could, like no dairy, no gluten, no processed food, like everything was made at home for him. We did all the things, and yet it was still getting worse. And that just made me think, like, what is happening? And I knew I didn't want to put him on topical steroids because I had been on them my entire life. And if they worked, like, why would I still need to be using them? And why do I still have eczema? It was just didn't make sense to me. So um, yeah, and then he ended up having accidentally eating cashews one day, and we ended up having to give him the EpiPen. It was like the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Like his tongue was sticking out, and he wasn't breathing. He was losing consciousness. Like it was really bad. And that really woke me up. I was like, I need to do something about this. Otherwise, like I'm gonna end up in that like the medical system and just not finding a solution. And that wasn't for me. So I had already started my nutrition journey, but that just kind of accelerated what I needed to learn. So I dove head and over into all the research, all of like the alternative doctors, the integrative doctors. That's who I was listening to, reading all their research, watching all of their content. And I figured out a way for us to heal, and he's been eczema free for like the last year and a half. He's little, he's not even 4 yet. And his like, we look at some of those pictures and he sees his face and he's like, what's that on my face? And I'm like, oh, your face is red because you had eczema. And it doesn't correlate because he doesn't even remember. But for me it does, and that's just like the biggest leading, like that's what drives me, because I want all these other kids that I see with these bright red cheeks. I'm like, let me help you. Let me do something for you. So
yes.
yeah, that's what brought me here.
Okay, I feel like we can jump into the veganism thing. I wanted to touch on first, just to mention, because you said you went to school and it was very pro plant. And I
Hmm.
just want to make a note of that for people, that even in a category like holistic nutrition or becoming a nutritionist or becoming a certified dietitian, like there are curriculums attached that were created by someone with specific beliefs. And just to bring up that, like, it's not always the best way, and it's not always the way it is for everybody else. And I think sometimes people think like, oh well, I talked to a registered dietitian and they said this. And I'm like, yeah, but that's based on Canada's food guide. And there's so many things that are in there that are not healthy, especially for registered dietitians if you're working in the hospital space. I mean, if you've ever been there and you see what they feed a cancer patient or a different, like it's not really based on health. It's based on trying to have the least amount of reactivity. So just starting to note, I really want to encourage you using mentors, using guides, using people who are educated in these fields to help you is important, but you still have to listen to your own body. And I'm sure you have a reason that you've kind of moved away because I'm assuming you're not fully vegan anymore, right?
No,
Right.
pretty
And
much
so
like carnivore-ish.
yes. And so I think this is where you need to be willing to shift when you know your body is telling, like screaming at you. And this was me too. I went way more plant based for a while and I realized my body was telling me to eat meat. And I think this is happening for a lot of people who have gone fully vegan, where you're going to end up, most people too, like you said, you were eating all the processed stuff and the stuff that, yes, it's a vegan option, but it's not nutritionally, it's just like eating bread and processed foods a lot of the time because all the nutrients have been taken out of it in the processing. Yeah, the
Yeah.
processing of the food. So just knowing that, be willing to shift, be willing to change if you notice that it's not working for your body, and just be mindful of who you're listening to, because if they have beliefs that are like, this is the only way, like that might not be the best thing for you. And there are people that on this planet, I always say, based on like where you grew up, where your bloodline is from, like what you used to be around in your genetic makeup, where yeah, thriving on fruits and vegetables could be best for you with small amounts of meat. Where for other people, if your whole bloodline grew up on potatoes and beef, like your body may process potatoes and beef way better than if you ate all these vegetables. So just really starting to learn intuitively like what works best for your body. I want you to kind of share like what moved you away from being fully vegan. And then, of course, like moving into what you did for the eczema, because so many kids have eczema, and obviously for you too,
Mhm.
making that decision that you didn't want to be in the medical system for your whole life using pharmaceuticals. Because, of course, it's like those are great when you need them and as a band aid option, but they're not getting to the root. And that's on you in terms of like healing your gut, healing nutrition, healing your life, in order to get off medications. And it is possible. Obviously, no, not medical advice. You can still speak with a doctor. But in my experience too, like I will opt out and avoid going to a doctor at all costs unless absolutely needed. Like if I can't heal something and I need an antibiotic, fine, I'm going to use one. But I do everything in my power to avoid having to use those things whenever I can. So I gave you a lot there. Maybe talk on the vegan part, what shifted you
Yeah.
out, and then we can jump back into what some steps you took for the pharmaceuticals for you to get off of that stuff and do your own healing, and then what led you to that with your babies.
Mhm.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. So once I started to really research and find out what were the people who were healing naturally and the ones who were doing it so they didn't have to enter the medical system any when they were fully sovereign in their own health, what they were doing is going eliminating a lot of things, but a lot of the vegetables were causing their not causing their issues, but making it worse. So things like beans and broccoli, cauliflower, like grains, these were all the things that irritate a gut that's already compromised. And when you have a skin issue, that's what's happening. So was like, okay, contemplated with the idea. I was like, do we really want to go back to having meat again? How am I going to shift everyone? My husband still was eating meat, barbecuing like every week, right? So it was kind of, he was happy that I decided to opt for it. And it was on New Year's Eve, 2021. I was like, okay, make me a steak. I'm going to try it. And I think I had already, like, my body had started to want to crave it again. Whereas before I was like, there's no way I'm putting that in my mouth. It's not gonna go well. I'm gonna puke. But it was just so good. And I was like, this is probably a really big calling. My intuition is being like, yo, you need to put something else in that body because everything else is ruining you. So we did, and switching
Okay, I
my
want to say that too because the same thing happened for me. I started getting these cravings for red meat again, where it
yeah.
was like animalistic. Like I needed it. It only happens usually like once or twice a month, usually close to my cycle, where my
Mhm.
body is like, you need red meat and you need it now. And then I
Yeah.
eat it and I don't really end up having a craving for it again until a month later. And if you think about, again, going back in time, most people didn't have access to these types of meat every single day. So it is normal to like have it in different spurts throughout the month too. Like you don't necessarily have to eat meat every single day,
Mm-hmm.
but just incorporating it in your diet, so powerful. Okay, continue. I just
Yeah,
wanted to say
like
same thing happened for me.
the smell of beef burgers barbecuing or like even hot dogs at that point. I was like, wow, that's I want that. But yeah, but transitioning my son and my daughter to that was hard. Like the first 2 weeks that we decided to do that because they didn't know any different was so hard. Like my son was like we baby led weaned and he was eating on his own on his chair and making the mess and stuff, and then all of a sudden he needed me to like hold him and put each bite into his mouth because he was so turned off by what I was putting on his plate, like all this ground beef and ground turkey with fruit, and he was just like, what am I doing? But so we had to kind of get through that first initial 2 week period of shock, and then now he's just like he'll be looking at pictures and he's like, Mom, can we have steak today? I'm like, okay. My 3-year-old is asking me for steak. So I think that's a huge win for us because once we switched to that, and there's more, obviously more that we did, but once we switched to a diet that was more animal forward, we still had, well, grains cut out, gluten cut out, conventional dairy was still cut out, very simple meals we were eating. That's when we really started to seeing a difference. For him, within like 2 weeks, his flares started to come down. There's obviously little blips. Like sometimes you'll get really good time period where there's like not as much flaring, and then it'll get worse again, and then it goes up again. So that's just holistic healing in general. It's not going to be that band-aid treatment that you get from like pharmaceuticals. But it was like gradually within 2 weeks, all of a sudden his face was way more clear. He wasn't as irritated by it. Me, on the other hand, I had to go through this huge purge. I call it a healing crisis because I had so many toxins throughout my childhood, medications and all the things, and then partying my face off in my 20s, and all the toxins were stored, so they needed to come out. So I went through this whole purging process. So that's why I was talking about with kids, they're so resilient, and it's actually easier to work with them because they heal so quickly compared to us adults. There's less toxic, they're more willing to heal, and plus they're when you think about the full mind body soul aspect of it, they're living in the present moment always, so they don't have the anxieties of the past or the future playing a part in their healing process, which is amazing, and I love that. um, so yeah, where was I going with this? Yeah, so we started with the nutrition, and then we started a little bit of gentle detoxing. um, Naturally your body starts to detox as you start to eliminate all the toxic crap. And even before this, we had already, like, we're a fragrance free household, we're using natural products and all of that stuff leading up to it, so it was helping. But the biggest kicker was the detoxing. When we really started to pull the things out of his system, I started to see like things in his poop, which was alarming, but it was what was needed. And then within 3 months, his face had cleared up, and it was just like, wow, okay, so this is the way it's supposed to be. And how many people are lost in the system? Like I feel like it's so dense, and like that dark energy of they're just like don't know where they're going and circling around and seeing different doctors and not getting
Well,
anywhere. Whereas
they've
here I
given
am.
away their power, right? Like they've
Mhm.
given away their power. They're looking at someone else to try to give them the answers rather than having that introspection of looking at themselves and going like, okay, what can I do? And the right voices. Because even doctors, I feel like if they're giving you this pill and this thing and this thing and nothing's working, that doesn't feel good either, to have to keep running people through these when you're like, I really don't even know the answer. Like you just keep, how for you? It's like they were treating each symptom rather than looking at the root cause to be like, okay, what is like the foundation of what's leading to all of these other things.
Mhm.
And they are, I feel that too. Like, and I'm sure as you come into just being familiar with energy, if you were to go, you feel it. Like if you
Mhm.
enter a hospital, if you enter these places, you're like, oh, like it doesn't feel right. Um, because there's so much, like you're saying, there's so much you can do in that natural detoxification process that you can do from home with like
Right.
guidance from people like you. For the people who don't know this stuff and this is totally new to them, there are people out there who you can look at for guidance and support in this area to help guide you on that path. And then it's like, then you can start listening to your own body and be like, oh wow, this really worked for me, this didn't work for me. So what was that detoxification process like? What kind of steps did you start taking, or what things did you start doing?
Well, there's so many different things out there, and there are safe ones for kids too. And that's one of the biggest questions I get. It's like, my kid's only 18 months, like, can I safely do it? Yes, there are ways that you want to things that you want to do beforehand to get them prepared for it. But then once you start to detox them, there are safe things that you can do. Like, one of my favorites is just like a zeolite and fulvic minerals. Um, that in itself will take care of a lot of the heavy metals, and then just like the pesticides and the environmental toxins that we're exposed to daily. It'll help nip that in the butt and just help nourish the body a little bit more. And then it just supports them in
Mm-hmm.
their natural ability to detox. So just giving them a little bit of a leg up is huge. So I like, with my kids, I like to do
Yeah.
start with the zeolite, but
Is this
the
in the spray? I have a
yeah,
spray.
it's in the spray, in the natural
Yeah.
form. There's synthetic ones you can get, but the synthetic ones I try to stay away from,
Yeah.
and even like the powdered ones, I stay away from those. And with the kids, it's so easy. You just like spray it in their mouth. It tastes
Yeah.
like water, and
Nice.
they don't mind it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with the clients that I work with
Okay, wait.
now,
So when you added that in, did you start? Because I know you can pass parasites, you can pass all these crazy things. I've never
Mhm.
been consistent enough and watched my kids, but I'm like, they're 5 and 6. Would you say, because I was doing like 4 sprays, but should I do like 4 sprays a day and start to see if I notice any difference in like releasing stuff?
Yeah,
Like, what
like do
would
it
you do for a 5 and 6 year old?
Uh, I'm assuming that you already have a pretty clean lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ish.
I would probably I mean, it's nobody's perfect. We're not gonna be
Yeah.
100%, right?
Yeah. They still love
Um,
Kit Kats and chocolate and all the things, right? I'm like, I feed them nutritionally at home, but like they eat stuff like that. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. They are kids, right? My
Yeah.
kids love their ice cream, so it's
Yes.
like I always say, like, on the weekends, sure, go ahead, have some ice cream, but during the week, we're gonna be as
Yeah.
clean as possible, and there's ways around it where they can still
Mm,
eat stuff that they really like, just
mm,
within a healthier version.
yes.
So, but with you, I would probably, up it, like, do it 3 times a day. I
Okay.
would, yeah, because
I'll
if they're
start
not
spraying
really
them. Mhm.
showing any, like, detox reactions, then yeah, I would totally do that.
Mhm.
The clients that I work with are a little bit more severe because they not only just have like the allergies and the skin issues
Yeah.
happening, there's so much more underlying.
Yeah.
A lot of them have like mold toxicity, or like heavy metals toxicity that kind of, it goes from the gut to the brain, right? There's just so many layers to it. So that's a great starting point, is with the zeolite, but then we always move
Mhm.
into something more targeted with herbs,
Mhm.
binders, things that'll actually go in and pull out those things. And that's when you start to see it in their poop. And I
Mhm.
always said, like, I have no shame in saying that I take one of those barbecue skewers, like the wooden ones, and go digging through my kids' poop.
Yeah.
And I recommend that to my clients, because then it's satisfying to know that what you're doing is working and it's coming out.
Mhm.
Some parasites are microscopic and you won't see it. So the only way you really know is once they start to feel better and you start to notice a difference in their mood, their
Mhm.
sleep, their digestion, and their skin, obviously.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, and what are some of the, just like name a couple of the binders or herbs or things that you would typically use, just in case they're familiar for people, and then it's like if they want to start looking into it, they can. But
Mhm.
obviously we'll link all of your info too within the show
Yeah.
notes. Yeah. What are some common ones that you find
Uh,
like, yeah.
Black walnut hull is a big one if you don't have any tree nut allergies. Um, Black walnut hull, and then for binders, charcoal, activated charcoal, or the zeolite actually acts as a binder too. Sometimes I'll just leave that in. Um, and there's also a something called mimosa pudica seed. It's an herb from India, and it turns almost into like a chia seed kind of a binder, but it goes into the gut and it just cleanses everything through the gut. So it like pulls
Mm.
out anything that might be stuck onto the intestinal walls, and it just like pulls it out. I like to have that, and sometimes I'll use essential oils like clove, oregano, and rosemary is a good one too. So just and cilantro. Cilantro is great for heavy
Mhm.
metals, and I just like to use the essential oil version of that.
Mhm.
For kids, I don't recommend them to digest or ingest it, but I'll just roll it onto the bottoms of their feet.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, there's those are the main ones that I like to use.
Okay, I have a
You
question.
can
This is
actually get
yeah,
prepared tinctures that are have it everything put together, and then you just use those because it takes the thinking part out of it.
right. I just got the
Mhm.
charcoal because I was gonna start them on it just to see because they're having like cavities, which I have a whole I'm like, that also doesn't I'm like, there has to be another way. Um,
Mhm.
so with the charcoal, do you typically because someone said like put it in water, like put it in a smoothie, they won't even notice. Like, how do you typically administer something like charcoal?
If it's in
Is
a
it
powdered form,
Yeah.
I love to just anything powdered, like even if they're capsules, like even with the mimosa pudica seed, it comes in a capsule. I put it into a little bit of applesauce, like on a spoon, and I just shove it in their mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Smart.
easiest way. And then any of the tinctures, I put it in some juice because
Yeah.
this sometimes they taste really strong, very gross.
Yeah.
Um, and they have like an alcohol base usually, so it
Mhm.
tastes very bitter. So if you put it in some orange juice and like in a 2 ounce shot glass or something, and then just have them take it down, it works well for kids.
Good. Love that. Okay.
Mhm,
So in terms of okay, so you had your skin issues. Obviously, you had your own gut issues. Do you want to
mhm,
speak a little bit to what you've noticed in terms of what you see as a collective going on for a lot of people? Um,
mhm.
just in terms of like that, the gut health issues that can be linked to, because of course that could have been linked to your anxiety. It could have been linked to so many different things that you were experiencing. What kind of steps did you take even for yourself as an adult to start healing your gut? And I know you mentioned this with the fruits and vegetables, which I think is also important for people to know, where it's not so much that this is what I think sometimes people get wrong also is that they're like, I don't know, I would actually like your opinion on this. Sorry, I keep coughing. But the those tests that basically show that you are what are they called? The allergen tests that people do?
Yeah, the IgE tests.
Okay, I hate them for me personally because I'm like anything you've eaten is going to show up on the list and then people are leave the office and they think that they are allergic to every single food and they can't eat anything where it's very normal that your body has a response to food because it's trying to break it down. So it's
Mhm,
to me I feel like it's almost showing you that yes it could you could have issues with some of these foods that are highly elevated but it's just showing you that your body's working. Like it's has the things in it to try to break these foods down. And I feel like where some people get lost is now they think they can't eat anything and they don't know what to eat. And now they're nutritionally deficient because they're not eating anything that's helpful for their body. And they're eating just like trying to limit it all. Where I think it's like once you heal your gut, ideally you should be able to add a lot of foods back in. Doesn't mean every single one. Doesn't mean you should add conventional dairy and gluten and these things that like are causing severe inflammation every single day. But ideally, your gut thrives and can break down food in, smaller quantities, let's say. So do you have an opinion on any of that?
That's exactly my opinion too.
Mhm.
I hear a lot of people like once they come to me, they've exhausted all other options, which is unfortunate,
Yeah.
but they've gone to see all the doctors, all the naturopaths, had all the tests done, and they're like that IgE test shows that they are allergic to literally everything, like even lettuce, like a head of lettuce, which is mostly water, and they're allergic to that. And it's just like that doesn't make sense to me. What that tells me is that they have a gut issue, inflammation in their gut that's causing them to absorb the food inappropriately. So when the gut is like super loose, like the gaps are really big, you're going to be absorbing bigger particles of the food. And then that's going to mount an immune response. That's where you get the inflammation. So inflammation is not a bad thing. But when it's inappropriate like that, that's when you get a lot of these issues that happen, like the skin inflammation and And it's usually a bigger component, like the liver is involved, the kidneys are involved, our lymphatic system's involved. It's so many layers to it. But yeah, then they come to me and they're like, well, I can't eat anything. So,
Right.
and this is not a way to be living.
I hate it.
So,
I've had
yeah.
people do that too, where they're like, I'm going to wait to go to my naturopath. And okay, no, I know naturopaths are really great and can be really helpful. However, again, be mindful because what I found is naturopaths, the way it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago versus now, they're very much almost in line with the traditional medical system. There's a lot that's overlapping. You walk in, you spend thousands and thousands on supplements. They're selling you something, you have all these tests. And I don't, and I, just from my experience of what, again, I work with nutrition clients and things people have told me, it can be really fear based rather than empowering. And if you're going somewhere that's leaving you feeling in fear without answers and then needing you to come back for multiple appointments and multiple tests and all these things, I just feel like, just again, use your own judgment. But I feel like when you're working with anyone, they should be helping empower you with your own healing, not leaving you feel afraid. They should be helping you feel like we're going to tackle this. There is a way. And like here, like you are giving people steps to heal this naturally, which I feel like, I don't know, makes you feel so much better than
Mhm.
leaving feeling disempowered. And just how many people go, they get that stupid test and then they think they can't eat anything. And maybe this is on them because they never go back to find out more information. But like they leave thinking they can't have anything. And then you feel so overwhelmed and like there's nothing that can help you. And so you almost feel like giving up altogether and you feel like it's all lost. Like all the efforts are lost and there's nothing you can do versus understanding, yeah, it's really normal. And just for a tagline word, like I feel like what you're describing, that's the how you guys might hear like leaky gut. So like leaky
Mhm.
gut syndrome, I feel like that's the same, that's a word that's heavily used right now, but helping you to understand that all it means is that your gut needs some healing because there's particles that are kind of leaking through your body is how you could think of it. um, and that's where it can cause inflammation and have issues breaking down and you need to heal that. And I'll give an example of mine, what I've noticed for me. For 2.5 years I was getting hormonal acne here and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I was drinking all the time back in 2021. I was eating more sugar, I was eating out, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like I'm eating like shit and I'm having lots of sugar, it's probably that. But it didn't go away and my diet didn't really change. And what I found it was is I've developed an allergy to oats. So every day I was having like oat milk, or I'd make pancakes with oats, or I'd have this grain that used to be deemed so healthy. There's different people with differing opinions on that, but my body was freaking out. And I had some this weekend, immediately a rash. So it sends my body into a massive inflammatory state and obviously is creating issues within my gut that I unknowingly was ingesting every single day. Oat milk, because oat milk lattes are so good and I love
Yeah.
them. But I'm like, my body's screaming at me that it hates it. And it wasn't until I cut that out that I'm like, oh, it's gone, don't have a
Mhm.
reaction anymore. So just knowing that, yes, sometimes there are ingredients that you need to cut that your body hates, but ideally you heal your gut enough that you can add these things back in. So not all hope is lost for your whole life. But I don't know if you want to say anything on that specifically.
Yeah.
Um, and then even just talking about your journey with like pharmaceuticals, obviously, and you choosing not that to use that path. And then what you found choosing more of a holistic route of using what we have on this earth to heal our bodies, which is how it's
Mhm.
supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's not the food. Like the food is
Yeah.
not the problem. It could be because the way our food is
Yes.
made now, it's like grown and processed. Yes, the food is a problem, but really our bodies should be able to
Mhm.
handle it. So it's something happening in our
Yeah.
bodies. And I'll give you an example of my son. He was when we had his allergies tested when he was about a year old, was allergic to eggs, and we were like, okay, now he's allergic to all these things, including eggs,
Mhm.
and now he can't have those either. Baked eggs, any kind of eggs, he was allergic to. But once we started to heal his gut, and
Mhm.
the allergist wanted us to go through all of this process with them so he could get better at handling it. And my gut was just like, oh, I don't want to do this, right?
Mhm.
Like, give me 6 months, let me heal his gut, and then we'll come back and maybe do this program of yours.
Mhm.
And yeah, within about 6 months, now he's eating eggs every single day. Like he has a scrambled egg every single day. We worked our way up from the baked egg to eventually now, he's accidentally had mayonnaise too a couple of times with no reaction. And that's just with the effort and the energy that we put into his healing and detoxing. So that's just like a prime example of his body now absorbing eggs properly, whereas before it was just like haywire, going crazy.
Have you
Um,
sorted the peanuts? Like, do you have an idea why so many kids are anaphylactic to peanuts? What do you feel like that's from?
I have my theories.
Yeah, I want to know your theory. Like, what do you think it is? Because this is so common, and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. We should not have kids dying from food. Like, it shouldn't happen. You should not be so allergic that it nearly kills you. Like, there has to be deeper stuff going on here. So, you can give a PG version, but like, what do you feel like that is?
Um, I really think a huge part of it is obviously our toxic environment is huge, but just the sheer number of vaccines our kids are getting at this age, and it was used, like peanut oil was used in the some of those vaccines, and you're putting it into a body who their immune systems are
Mm,
immature, and you're putting it directly into their bloodstream where their gut doesn't even have
mm,
a chance to even try to deal with it. Like if it had gone into their gut, like orally, maybe they could have a chance. But to some kids who
mhm,
are genetically susceptible, that's why some kids will not have issues, and then the other, even within a family, one child will, like my family. My daughter is not doesn't have any allergies, but my son does, and that makes me believe that maybe genetically he is predisposed
mhm.
to it. But I think it
Okay, but
could
just
have
think
a lot to
about
do with
that. Like you're teaching on gut health, and we know leaky gut food particles getting into your bloodstream detrimental to inflammation in your body. But it makes so much sense because if peanut oil is used and it's injected, your body is going to try to attack that exact thing that was just injected into your body. So it makes so
that.
much sense that you've built up these antibodies or whatever you want to call it, where your body physically feels like it's being attacked when you ingest that again because of the reaction that you would have had when it was injected that first time. No, I
Mhm.
got like full chills because I'm like, no, it makes so much sense.
Yeah,
Like,
and same with eggs too, because some of these vaccines, the way that they're
mm,
made are on egg shells, like with the
yeah.
protein and the albumin that's in there. And then you're literally not giving them a chance. And we're bombarding them with so many of them
Mhm.
too, which is mounting this response. And a lot of times, like when they're first exposed to an
Well, and you
allergen and
can't
they're
have food.
predisposed,
Imagine I shoved an egg through your face.
yeah.
Your body's gonna be like, whoa, that's not supposed to be in my blood. So of course you're gonna create an autoimmune response. Your body's doing the right thing, trying to fight that off.
Hmm.
Makes so much sense. Sorry, what are you
Yeah.
gonna say? I got
No,
excited.
not a lot of people like to like acknowledge that or talk about it. And I'm not blaming them, but a lot of time, this is our life right now. This is our lifestyle and this is our society and our environment. So I really advocate to limit as many of these toxins our kids are going to be exposed to as much as possible where we have control. And that's where I think a lot of people get so overwhelmed because there's
Mhm.
so much information out there and they're just like scared. Well, outside
Yeah.
of these four walls, there's people are spraying things, there's pesticides everywhere, the car exhaust is just like,
Mm.
what are we supposed to do? But if you just focus on what you can and
Yeah.
tune out the other noise, that's where you're going to have the most success.
Yep.
And it kind of goes back to like seeing all these doctors, getting all these tests done, and most people are left frustrated and confused than before they even entered that doctor's office. The doctor just kind of washes their hands of you. Okay, good luck. See you next time. Come back when things get worse. And that was my biggest issue with it. I'm like, us moms have given up so much of our power to these authority figures who may or may not have our best interest at heart. So I needed to find a way where we could um, take back our control and then make sure that what we're doing, we're accessing is the most natural way first. Like, I'm not saying don't go to the doctor if your kid's having an infection and it's not getting better. Definitely go do that. It's there for that reason. I've had to use the medical system with my son because of his allergies, like it's there for a reason. But if you can nip it in the bud naturally with all the tools that you have at home first, why not? And it's just like you don't get the same side effects and all of the other nasty things that happen. Like antibiotics, for example, right? Like they're needed when it's needed, but then look what it does to the gut. It completely wipes out all of the bacteria that you need. So there's just like an overuse of the Western medical system, and I see it every single day. Like moms in my groups, they'll be like, "Oh, my kid, something happened to my kid's finger. I went to the doctor," or "We went to the emergency room." I'm just like, call me first next time. Like, I'll
Yeah.
come drop something off for you.
Like, I have a tincture for that. You don't need to go. No, it is. It's really true. And that's how I feel also. I'm like, okay, the medical system, we can marry the two. Like that's
Mhm.
where I'm like, great that we have modern medicine when it is needed. But we have so many of us. I remember as a first time mom, you walk in and you're going to a wellness visit and you go to the hospital for a birth and you just are immediately put into this way of doing things that in my body, every single step of the way felt unnatural. Like I just got this feeling like, no, I don't, this doesn't feel right. I don't know. I don't know. And then I would think, is this just like new anxiety because I'm a new mom and I don't really know? And like, I don't want them to hurt my baby. And like, maybe I don't know best. Maybe this doctor knows better. Like it made me question my natural knowing. And I
Mhm.
wasn't the same person I am right now where I would never, ever question that ever again. But like I even realized how that happened when we were at the dentist. It was the first time I've had like a medical-ish type thing where I just went, whoa, the psychological way that they are taught in school to speak is it's so deep, you guys, in how they are taught and how to talk to you and basically coerce you into a decision and override your natural questioning process, your things that you don't really know are true. Like you just can feel it in your body, but then you don't know the right answer. So you just kind of go, okay, yeah. Like it feels off, but you're like, okay, yeah, makes sense. Because I remember this is before I had even known anything about vaccines. I questioned it and I didn't want to do it. And I was like, this just feels wrong. Like, this doesn't feel right to do this to this little perfect little baby. Like, why would I do this? Like, it doesn't make sense. But I did it because I didn't want to be that like anti vaxxer crazy person. Like, ooh, you're so weird. Like, why wouldn't, you know? Anyway, so I did it out of feeling like I had to. And
Mhm.
then as I've obviously learned, like with Maddox, it was a totally different situation. But again, like you feel like you have no other choice. And I think as you start to learn that and bring back your power and realize that, I mean, even birth, I'm like, it's not supposed to be in this setting where you don't feel safe. Like you need to feel open. The only way for you to be open is to feel safe. This is why there's so many medical interventions in birth, because typically like you're with your partner at home and you have people caring for you and it's special and gentle and not this big dramatic thing. It's just like this easy thing that we do that our body knows how to do. And then you keep baby with you and you have your boob right there. Like babies don't need much. They need your boob, they need your body. And our nervous system, that's a whole other thing that we could go into for why I feel like moms are having such a hard time. But they're under supported. They don't have the proper education. Like I went to all those birthing classes because I thought I was like getting prepared. It didn't help me for anything. Like, okay, great, some knowledge, but I'm like, for when that baby actually comes out, I'm like, that's when you need the support. That's when you need to know that like your nipples are going to hurt and what can you do and all these different things that happen. And then everything that happens after that. And even the introduction of food, like there's just so much. I know you talked on formula and it is like that's when I had to look at potentially using some when my milk dropped because I had two babies back to back. I ordered something from Europe. That's what I did way back then. And that's just like, just to note that this, if you were to go to Europe right now and eat bread or eat anything, their milk, you don't have a reaction like you do here because they have such high standards with the European standard that they can't put what we are able to put in our stuff in Canada and the US. And I
Mhm.
used to even feel like the US was so bad and Canada was better. But while I was living in the US, I went, yeah, but they have a ton of options for
Mhm.
even like unprocessed dairy. You can buy it legally. Here, you cannot get it. So even things like that, like you can get it in the States. You can find organic, well raised meat and vegetables and local farms. Like there's so many options that I have found we don't have as much here. We are way more limited in our options than I was living in the States. Maybe that's because I was in California, so it was like more, well known, but I just find there are healthier options if you look for them there, where here we're just super limited. So, um what would you recommend to a mom that's struggling with skin issues with their kids or things that they don't really know? What would you say on that? Like, where should they start?
Um, Definitely start with removing anything that could be toxic. And I know for a lot of people, it just like the idea of removing certain things is like their comfort. They're like cling onto it. Things like perfume and scents and like the synthetic scents. If you have a
Mhm.
kid who has skin issues, like that's very irritating to their skin and their whole
Mhm.
system. So that's one of the first things I would
Okay,
do.
so just to add to that, so that would be like it could be baby wash. Like, I remember
Mhm.
when I first did Maddox in the NICU, because again, I was trying not to be like the crazy person, so I didn't want to bring my own products, and I used Johnson& Johnson's baby wash, and his skin flared up in this massive rash, and I went, "Okay, you need to just start listening to yourself and stop using this stuff." But it's the synthetic fragrance, it's the ingredients that are in there. So, dropping all of that. Could be scents in your home, lotions, perfumes, body washes, shampoos, like be really mindful of the crap you're picking up in the store. Okay, so that's step one. And then what would you say?
And then nutrition and dialing
Mhm.
back on the inflammatory foods. Like even if you don't have an allergy to dairy or gluten or any of these things, removing them for a certain amount of time is really, really important. Especially like you mentioned, are the standards of agriculture here are not good. Even like the organic wheat that you pick up like the bread and you're like, okay, it's organic sourdough and it must be really good. And there's only like 4 or 5 ingredients on it. But a lot of those crops are contaminated by the non organic ones. So they still get that, the pesticides on them. And it's because of just the rules and stuff that are in North America. So gluten, cutting that out and cutting out conventional dairy. Um, I've, there's a lot of
Wait, can I
benefits
jump
to
in on
having
this too? I've noticed this with because Daxon is basically a self-proclaimed vegan, like doesn't care for meat, eats chicken here and there, has no interest in dairy, but Maddox loves dairy. And so I started introducing it again, conventional, because I couldn't get my hands on anything else. Um, Even organic yogurt, his body, he's congested, his nose is running, he's breathing funny, he's inflamed, he sleeps with his mouth open. Like all of these things started happening from the yogurt. We don't do regular milk. So, but regular milk and yogurt, but he can have cheese and the
Mhm.
cheese doesn't cause a reaction. So just again, starting to play and notice with your kids, if you cut certain things out, how do they react? How do they respond? Because for
Mhm.
him, the milk and the if it's even ice cream, I find doesn't give so much of a reaction, but the yogurt sent his body into a frenzy where like he can have some cheese and he's totally okay. So just being mindful of that, because I even noticed for myself, I get really congested from dairy, but I can have some cheese, like good quality cheese, and I'm okay
Mhm.
versus the other stuff. So again, just pay attention and be mindful. So anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, and it's different for each kid, and it could be like the threshold. Like if he's had too much dairy in a short amount of time, then that could kind of make his bucket spill over. It could be that too. Or another thing that just crossed my mind is yogurt has a lot of good bacteria, probiotics in it. But one of the causes of eczema and one of the issues a lot of people have is an overload of bacteria in their gut, something like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when you put in more bacteria, it can cause a worsening issue. So you really have to work on the healing part first and then bring in like the probiotics and the yogurts and kimchi and all that kind of stuff. So that usually in my protocol comes a lot later. Whereas if you go to a naturopath or another doctor, they will say right off the bat you have a skin issue, try some probiotics, when really that can cause it to worsen. So that could be a piece of it too. Yeah, so just once you've eliminated all of the things, and a lot of times people have already eliminated those things before they even come to me. And then they're like, well, it's still not working. What else do I need to do? That's when you need to go in and start detoxing. But you can't detox unless you're have really open detox pathways, drainage pathways. For kids, it's super easy because they're always jumping, running, rolling around, and super active, but you still see kids that are constipated. So you really want to work on that bowel movements, getting like 2 to 3 bowel movements a day before you start to pull out those pathogens, because then they're going to cause bigger issues and those toxins need to go somewhere. If they're sitting in a constipated colon, that they're just going to recirculate, the toxins are going to recirculate. So that's a big piece of it, working on digestion. And then I'll just go through the different phases that I go through with my kids. And so once you've done the detoxing, and you're usually at this point, they're like 50 to 75% clear on their skin, and they're starting to, have a lot of optimism. They're like, okay, this is so great. But you're still super restricted on your diet because you're still not eating the grains, the dairy, gluten, sugar, and you're making all your foods. And we're humans. We like to socialize when we eat and go out to have dinners and maybe have Friday night pizza nights. So my goal is always to get them back to that state where they can reintroduce those foods. So once we bring in some probiotics, repopulate the gut, and then we go into food reintroduction, which is the very last phase. We slowly start to bring some things back because by that point, hopefully your bodies can tolerate more toxins, and like having a pizza or a burger or some fries or something once a week is not going to send you into a full flare. That's the end goal, and it's like the most exciting, satisfying piece of the whole thing. And at that point, then you're done and you don't need me anymore. And that's where the empowerment part comes in, because you're now equipped with all of the tools in case maybe you guys completely go back to the beginning again and, live the standard American lifestyle again. At least you have this under your belt where you can reintroduce the same protocol, the same plans, the same steps, and then get back to a state where you can enjoy life like a normal person.
No, I love that. And I I want people to really know that. Like, I think we hear so often, like, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that. There's so much information, especially if you follow anyone in the health and wellness space and differing opinions that are on social media, where I always think, I'm like, the goal is to be able to eat everything. Like,
Mhm.
obviously in moderation, but if I want regular crappy pizza, that my body can break it down. And yeah, I might not feel great after, but it's not going to send my body into a frenzy. Versus if you eat it constantly, obviously you know it's not serving your body. So you want to be mindful of that, but still be able to live your life and not have to be stressed out about a flare up or some big issue happening just because you ate a certain food. And I think that is the goal, is you want to be able to get back there. You want your kids to be there. I know some people are so hyper, I don't know if it would be like awareness or stressed about making everything perfect for their kids. And I don't know if you have opinions on this too, where I'm like, I feed them as nutritionally as I can, but sometimes they want a sucker or a candy or different things. And I'm like, those were fun memories in my childhood too. Obviously, they're not great. Obviously, they're not nutritionally dense. But in certain times, I'm like, it can be fun and it's okay if, again, moderation and you're not doing it all the time. Like, it's okay. Um, do you feel like that with your kids too, where you're like, ideally they're just not having flare ups, and then if they have something, it's all good, and you just go back to nutritionally eating most of the time?
Yeah, like during our huge, like the
Yes.
purging part, the first initial piece, we were very strict about
Yeah.
everything. But
You
now
have
we're in
to
a
be.
state where, yeah, we had to be. It's almost like a treatment that you're doing. If you
Yeah.
got diagnosed with something horrible and you needed to go on a completely, supportive diet, you would do
Mhm.
that. And so that's
Mhm.
what we did. But now we don't need to. We get to like, but I'll tell you this, the suckers and the candies and the things that I bring into the house for as treats for the kids, they are, better options, let's say, like sweet treats or like those lollipops that are mostly like honey, things like that, but they still feel like a treat. So those are
Yes.
the kinds of things that I bring into the house.
Yeah.
And I don't stress about it when we leave the house. Like if they're going to go to a birthday party and they're going to have Dairy Queen ice cream cake with all the dyes and the barely any cream in the ice cream,
Yeah.
they're gonna be fine with that.
Yeah.
Or a good example was for vacation, like going to an all inclusive. My kids ate ice cream every single day, probably like 2 or 3 times a day, and that was fine because we're at a stage where they can handle it, and we're on vacation. Like enjoy, you can
Mhm.
do that. But once we get back into our four walls, it's gonna be what we bring in, and we get to control that. So
Mhm.
I think there's a balance between that. And when we go out to eat and things like that, the kids will, order their grilled cheese sandwiches and fries everywhere we
Mhm.
go. Even if it's like a 5-star restaurant and they ask for a
Yeah.
grilled cheese sandwich, I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Right. And I'm like, that's just kids and it's okay. Right.
Mm.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Like, anyone who, I don't know, like, what do you think is the biggest missing piece for people that you see as like a big overhaul? Do you feel like
Mhm.
it's misinformation? Do you think it's too much information? Do you think it's really not knowing that this is even a thing that they have to worry about in regards to gut health? Like, what do you commonly see as the
Mhm.
biggest thing? Like, what's the first step people can start to take?
I think the biggest missing piece, and this is kind of why I've geared more towards kids now, is that other than going the conventional route for eczema, which is steroids,
Mhm.
there's no other option for them in this field, like in holistic health. There's just any kind of other practitioner that you go and see, it's just another band-aid treatment. And that was a big wake up call for me as like
Mhm.
all of these parents that are coming to me have zero options and they're looking for that.
Mhm.
They have gone to all the doctors. They're not satisfied with what they're getting. Let's just put it
Mhm.
that way.
Mhm.
And the information online, there's just not much of it anymore. All the
Mhm.
things that I teach and the things that I preach and that are in my program, I learned back in 2020, 2021. And that was an even then there was a lot of information. Had so many different doctors out there, the integrative doctors that were speaking out, and you got so much from them. Whereas now they've kind of disappeared.
Mhm.
And it's most likely they've kind of been silenced and there's not a lot of things out there anymore. They're really cryptic about their
Mhm.
information into the general public.
Mhm.
So there's just a huge missing piece for the kids and for the kids, but also support for their parents and the whole family as a household because entire family has to adopt this lifestyle. It's not
Mhm.
just singling out one kid. So I guess the missing piece really is the support for families and giving them everything that they need in a simplified form. There's just too much confusion, frustration, and that's just a huge part of what I do. Yes, it's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, right? But it's simple, super
Mhm.
simple to the T. I give you what you need, and then I'm there for support. Um, like with the moms, they are struggling, a lot of them, and
Mhm.
it's wearing on their own mental health. So a lot of my work is managing the moms. Are you
Mhm.
taking care of yourself? Are you taking time for yourself? Are you working out? Are you moving your body? As
Mhm.
well as are you feeding your child what you're supposed to?
Right. Yeah. And I will say that too. Like, I come from a background in nutrition. I know a ton. I know a lot. Trying to get your kids to do what you know is best is not easy. Like,
Mhm.
it really isn't. You can know about nutrition and they can refuse to eat certain things that you know would help their body. And that is tough. And that's where I go, okay, I'm going to do my best with you. But at the same time, like, unless they had a crazy health issue, of course, then what am I would have to get a lot more firm. But I think for them right now, I'm like, they're doing pretty good aside from these cavity things that showed up, which I'm like, that's just processed sugar, right? In their life and their diet.
Maybe like mouth breathing too. That could be like one
I
thing,
know it can
sleeping.
lead to it too, but they don't. Yeah, the dentist had said that because they have big tonsils, but I'm like, they're not huge mouth breathers. So, anyways, I'm like, there's just another thing that I'm going, this is unnatural. It doesn't make sense. There has to be another way. Um, and I feel like, again, it's conventional diet is leading to the decay of our teeth, where
Mhm.
in back in the day, we didn't have all these fake foods that we're putting in our mouth that disintegrate and eat away at our teeth. And I always just think like, okay, if this is what's happening to our teeth the second that it touches, like imagine what this is doing to our body over time. It's decaying our teeth and our body. So moving towards more whole foods. And this is something too where I find, depending on the age of your kids, if you can tie real understanding, they're more willing to partake. And I don't know if you've noticed this too, but with mine, where I said to him, okay, you have cavities now, chewing hard things and his jaw development. And I was like, you need to eat harder foods. And he's like, yeah, but they're hard. I'm like, yeah, but it's going to build your jaw and like help you. And whether you
Mhm.
say it so you don't have to go to the dentist or it's to heal your teeth or however you want to talk about it. But I'm like, I have them gnawing on full size carrots now so that they have more roughage in their diet. And they both have chosen to do it because they understand why it's good for them. So
Mhm.
starting to help based on age, help them understand at a level that's good for them of why we're doing this thing, what it leads to, rather than just being like, you have to do this. Okay, well, I would want to understand why. So trying to
Mhm.
help them understand like what is this helping? So it's like if you have a skin issue, okay, by doing this, it's going to make that itchiness or like that skin go away. They might be like, oh, okay. And they're way more willing because now they understand the benefit of what you're trying to encourage them to do.
Even at a young age, it's
Yeah.
totally appropriate to be talking about this kind of stuff. And I've been talking about this with my
Mhm.
daughter forever since she was like 3. And she knows like she doesn't want to eat her sweet potatoes sometime. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to help you see better at night and make it
Yeah.
fun. Like you can be like a superhero. You can see it really, really in dark lighting.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, lately, actually, the teeth have been coming up a lot lately. Like
Same.
it just, oh, I don't know. It's just coming up with everyone that I speak to. But same
Mhm.
with my daughter. Anytime she'll have like a chewy piece of meat, just spits it out. And I'm like, you can chew that. Just try a little harder. It's going to help you get some hard teeth.
Yeah.
And I referred it to dinosaurs to her last night about this actually.
Mhm.
Like the big, strong dinosaurs, the T Rex, and they have really sharp teeth because they eat meat and they're the strongest ones. And
Mhm.
then the herbivores, they only eat plants and they're really soft food, so their teeth are really soft. And I'm like, you want to be the big, strong one, right? And she
Mhm.
was just like, okay, fine. Like, I'll try a little bit more.
Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
So really bringing in examples that can help them understand, because then they naturally will want to be strong and healthy, right? Like if you bring this awareness to them, and I feel like age appropriate, but helping them understand why these things are beneficial. You're teaching them about health from a young age. Same thing
Mhm.
with like they know. I always say I'm like you can eat. This is what I did to my kids when they were little. I would let them eat as much candy as they wanted. I never put a restriction. So if we were sitting there and they said they wanted this whole bag of gummies, I'd be like, okay. They'd puke, and I'd be like, yeah, don't feel good. And they're like, no. And so they learn to self regulate themselves. I didn't have to
Mhm.
impose a boundary. I didn't have to say, no, 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 you can't do this. I just let them, and they figured out, they're like, oh, I feel like crap. I feel sick. I'm like, how do you feel? They associated the feelings to it. They've never done it again. They know how to
Mhm.
manage it themselves because even as like 3, 4, 5, they knew that they're like, oh, yeah, when I eat this, I puke. Or when I eat this, I don't feel good. Or when I eat this, whatever. So they will choose of like, oh, I know now I can have 1 or 2, but then I feel sick. So they
Mhm.
have that self-regulation with themselves, and I never had to say no. And I don't know if you've noticed this working with adults, but when I worked with a lot of adults who had issues with their weight, a lot of them were told what they could and could not eat, or they weren't allowed to have certain things. And then because those things were taken away, the second that they had freedom to do what they wanted, they didn't understand why they like needed to eat the whole thing of cookies and needed to buy all these foods that they were never allowed to have. So I'm educating them from a really young age that they have that power within them to know that this food doesn't actually really serve me. I don't feel very good. And then a lot of the time they'll be like, no, can I have healthy food? They call it healthy food or real food first. And I'll be like,
Mhm.
yeah. So we fill up a plate of all real food. And then if they still want the chocolate after, then they eat the chocolate. And this has helped them because sometimes they're like, oh, I don't want it anymore. I'm like, right. Your body's
Mhm.
craving those certain sugars because your body just needs carbohydrates. And I start to educate them on like, a banana, you might not want that candy. And then sometimes they have the banana and they're like, oh yeah, I feel better. I'm like, right. Like your body's just craving a sugar because it needs quick energy. It doesn't need to be the chocolate or the whatever it is. So just knowing that your kids, empower them because they are so smart and they know so much. Just inherently they know so much and they have so much wisdom that hasn't been lost because they haven't listened to all this other stuff outside of them. They still, like you said, that mind body soul connection, they're still so in tune with their own bodies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they'll grow
Any
up to
last
be
things you want
adults
to
that
add?
can
Huh?
control themselves.
What'd you say?
Then they'll grow up to be adults that won't be binge eating and eating all the crappy stuff and they'll be healthy.
Yeah. Just bringing
Mhm.
awareness to food is so huge. Any final thoughts before we end it? Where can people
Um,
find you? How can they reach out to you? Obviously, I'll put it in the show notes too, but in case they're listening.
you can find me. Instagram's probably the most where I'm most active. So my handle is at the Healthy Way Academy. You can find me on my website too, thehealthywayacademy.com. I have shifted gears more towards like the kids and supporting the
Yeah.
kids, but I do still have options for adults as well. The my bread and butter and where my clients see the most success is with my one-on-one mentorship. It's
Yeah.
just where the magic happens, but I do have options for everyone. So
Mhm.
um, you can find me there. You just send me a DM because I think connection and that one-on-one energy interaction has been lost a lot over the years, and I'm big on that. So just send me a DM and I can recommend what I think is best for you that way.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And we'll be sure to link some stuff in the show notes for anyone that wants to find you and may want to start this journey themselves. And I think just for me, I'm feeling like even as an adult, going through a detox for yourself can be so helpful to give your gut a break. So just know that. And one other tip that I found that's been really helpful for me is giving my body a minimum of 12 hours, not for weight loss, not for anything else, like stop eating at 7, not that, but just giving my body time where it's not digesting food. Because if we're constantly digesting food, it doesn't give our body any time to heal and do the work elsewhere that our body needs. And so that's where fasting, like how you may hear these intermittent fasting, all these terms are helpful. But for women especially, I'm like, I always say 12 to 14 hours is great to just give your body some time to reset. So if you're not already giving your digestive system a little break by not eating constantly, do that. And you might even start to feel better just from doing that alone. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hit